At the beginning of the story, we are taken to an RAF airbase in Scotland, where everyone is rushing to prepare for an emergency. A passenger flight has been hijacked, so Colonel Drummond is immediately called in to take command. As soon as he arrives, an officer briefs him on the situation. According to intelligence, both the pilot and co-pilot are believed to be dead. On top of that, one passenger is listed on Germany's terrorist watch list. Without wasting any time, Drummond heads to the control center. One officer guides the aircraft through the landing, while another tracks it on radar. A few moments later, the plane finally lands. But the rough touchdown makes everyone even more nervous. As soon as it stops, Drummond orders his men to establish contact with the people inside. But before anyone gets a response, there is sudden movement near one of the aircraft's doors. The next moment, a parachute drops from the plane, carrying a little boy safely to the ground. Drummond orders rescue crews to bring him to safety. At the same time, the soldiers spot a man inside the cockpit. Drummond warns him that any suspicious move will result in immediate gunfire. However, the man desperately insists he is not a terrorist. A short while later, Drummond sends his translator to speak with the rescued boy, Tom. Unfortunately, Tom is too traumatized to answer any questions. The story then takes us back one day earlier. We see Tom's mother, Sophie, preparing for their flight. A little later, she speaks with her doctor in New York. It turns out she is traveling there with Tom to receive treatment for a secret illness she has been hiding. Meanwhile, Tom finishes checking their luggage. That night, they arrive at the airport, pass through security, and head toward the waiting area. Before boarding, Sophie goes to the restroom, fills a syringe with medicine, drinks from a small bottle, and injects herself. Meanwhile, Tom meets a man named Fareed in the waiting lounge, and the two quickly become friendly. A little while later, Sophie returns, and together they board the plane. At the same time, the head flight attendant offers coffee to the pilot and co-pilot Bastian, before asking Et Ball to deal with a rude first-class passenger. Soon afterward, the aircraft takes off from Germany toward the United States. Several hours into the flight, Sophie returns to her seat after visiting the restroom. As she writes in her notebook, a photo of her and her husband slips out, bringing back painful memories. Her flashback begins with her family living a happy life before becoming stranded in a deserted place. Her husband leaves to search for help while Sophie waits with their young son. Back on the flight, Sophie senses something is wrong near the front of the aircraft. Et Ball appears to be struggling with an aggressive passenger when an air marshal restrains him. Moments later, a second marshal joins them. However, the real nightmare begins right then. While both marshals question the passenger, Et Ball suddenly stabs the second marshal to death. At the exact same moment, the passenger attacks the first marshal. Et Ball sends Curtis to find the third marshal. Curtis kills him, takes his gun, and returns. Et Ball then murders the last surviving marshal as well. On the other side of the cabin, Sophie realizes something is terribly wrong. Suddenly, Et Ball points his gun at everyone and orders them to remain seated. A moment later, the rest of his accomplices reveal themselves and force the passengers toward the rear of the aircraft. Meanwhile, Berg enters the cockpit and tells Bastian that the pilot has already been killed before dumping the body into the lower compartment. After taking complete control, Berg announces that the aircraft is under their control and orders everyone to remain still. At the same time, Yuri reprograms the aircraft's black box before informing Berg that the job is complete. Immediately afterward, the co-pilot changes the flight path according to the hijacker's plan. Meanwhile, Tom becomes worried about his mother. Sophie comforts him, and Tom notices a place where sunlight won't reach her. Meanwhile, Curtis pulls Fareed toward the front while Carl tries to calm Et Ball. However, Tom quietly slips away. The moment Sophie notices, she runs after him. Unfortunately, Et Ball follows them and shoots Sophie right in front of Tom. Watching his mother get shot leaves Tom heartbroken. Et Ball grabs the terrified boy, but Carl steps in and returns Tom to his seat. A little later, Berg learns Et Ball shot Sophie without permission. Furious, he warns him never to do it again. Even so, Berg uses Sophie's apparent death to frighten the passengers. The story then shifts back into another flashback. We see Sophie waiting inside a car with her son while her husband searches for help. After waiting for a long time, she follows his footprints into the forest. After walking for a while, she discovers an abandoned house. Inside, she finds blood covering the floor. Following the trail into the basement, a terrifying vampire suddenly attacks her. Sophie barely escapes into the basement, only to find her husband lying there dead. During the struggle, the vampire bites her. Then, just as it is about to kill her, sunlight pours through the broken window, burning the vampire to ashes. Suddenly, Sophie opens her eyes. She is back on the hijacked plane, and somehow, she is still alive. A short while later, Sophie hears dogs barking from the cargo hold and quietly climbs down to investigate. Meanwhile, Berg forces Fareed and two other men to record a terrorist message. At the same time, Curtis and Yuri enter the cargo hold to build a bomb. Sophie hides beneath a vehicle. Just then, Sophie drinks one of the dog's blood. The barking attracts Yuri, and the moment he finds her, she instantly attacks and kills him. Meanwhile, Fareed is escorted back to the passenger cabin and sits beside Tom. On the other hand, Sophie's body starts transforming into something even more terrifying. Feeling her vampire instincts taking over, she desperately searches for her medicine. Before she can inject it, however, she overhears Berg saying there are only 10 minutes left before the jump. Hearing this changes everything. Sophie returns to Yuri's body and drinks his blood, accelerating her transformation. Afterward, she slowly makes her way back toward the main cabin. Meanwhile, the hijackers lie to the passengers, claiming poisonous gas will be released if anyone leaves their seat. After that, they head into the cargo hold and discover Yuri's body beside one of the dogs, making it appear the animal killed him. Around the same time, Sophie reaches the rear of the aircraft to bring Tom with her. The passengers panic, believing her appearance will trigger the poisonous gas. Ignoring everyone's fear, Sophie takes Tom and heads for the cockpit. But once they arrive, they discover the pilots have already abandoned it. Realizing someone has to take control, Sophie asks if anyone knows how to fly a plane. One man steps forward and follows her into the cockpit. The moment they enter, Sophie immediately locks the cockpit door before Fareed can get inside. Meanwhile, the hijackers put on scuba gear as they prepare to parachute out, while Berg stays in contact with the team waiting below. Inside the cockpit, Sophie's transformation becomes even more horrifying. Even Tom begins getting scared. Just then, the man realizes the aircraft is still flying on autopilot. After checking the security monitors, Sophie spots the hijackers preparing to jump. She tells the man not to disable the autopilot until every hijacker has left. However, Edbal suddenly realizes something shocking. Sophie is still alive. He immediately returns with Berg to find her. Before long, they learn Sophie is inside the cockpit and rush to the door. Instead, Sophie orders the man to change course back toward the United States. Although he argues Europe is closer, he silently obeys. The moment the hijackers notice the aircraft changing direction, Berg shoots a passenger dead. He then shouts that unless Sophie opens the cockpit door, he will continue killing passengers one by one. After saying that, Berg orders Etbal to bring him another hostage. Etbal grabs a little girl and drags her in front of Berg, placing her where Sophie can see her. Before Berg can hurt the little girl, Sophie immediately opens the cockpit door and rushes out. In the very next moment, she attacks Berg and sinks her fangs into his neck. The horrifying sight leaves everyone frozen in fear. Meanwhile, the man inside the cockpit quickly locks the door. After draining Berg's blood, Sophie turns toward the remaining hijackers. Terrified, they run toward the cargo hold. However, the real nightmare has only just begun. Berg's body also starts transforming. The moment Sophie hears him, she rushes back and finishes him off before he can fully transform. Meanwhile, Etbal witnesses everything with his own eyes. A little later, Sophie returns to the cockpit door and tells Tom not to open it under any circumstances because it is the safest place for him. After saying that, she walks into the restroom and realizes her transformation has progressed even further. On the other hand, Etbal searches through Sophie's bag. After a while, he finds her notebook and reveals something unbelievable. Sophie is actually a vampire. However, Carl refuses to believe him because he hasn't witnessed any of Sophie's attacks. In fact, he is far more disturbed by Etbal's increasingly violent behavior. At that moment, Etbal shows everyone a powerful UV light, explaining that he plans to use it against Sophie. Meanwhile, Sophie injects herself with another dose of medicine, triggering another flashback. We see Sophie struggling to raise young Tom while constantly fighting her thirst for blood. One day, as Tom cries non-stop, the monster inside her nearly takes over. Horrified, she locks herself in the bathroom and brutally breaks her own fangs so she can never hurt him. Sometime later, Sophie returns to the abandoned house where she became a vampire. There, she meets the father of the vampire who bit her. He admits that neither he nor his son could ever control their bloodlust. Believing vampires only bring suffering, he suddenly shoots Sophie, convinced death is the only cure. Back on the plane, Etbal sharpens a wooden stake while the remaining willing hijackers argue about their next move. At the same time, Carl tells Bastian their only chance is to retake the cockpit. Meanwhile, Tom quietly leaves the cockpit. The man inside desperately warns him to return, but Tom ignores him and helps Sophie out of the restroom. The moment the man sees her alive, he panics and locks himself back inside. At that very moment, Sophie slowly walks toward Etbal, but Etbal has been waiting for her. He shines a powerful UV light directly at Sophie while holding the wooden stake. Her skin instantly burns and the unbearable pain knocks her unconscious. Seeing this, Etbal orders the others to retake the cockpit while he examines Sophie. While searching her, he discovers one of her syringes and fills it with her blood. Just as he is about to drive the stake through her heart, Tom suddenly appears and points a gun at him. However, Etbal calmly walks toward the boy. As he grabs the weapon, it accidentally fires. The bullet shatters one of the airplane windows. Instantly, the cabin loses pressure, violently shaking the aircraft. Inside the cockpit, Bastian warns everyone they have only about 10 minutes of oxygen left. Meanwhile, Sophie regains consciousness, helps Tom put on an oxygen mask, grabs the gun, and shoots Etbal. Wounded, he runs away. At the same time, the man inside the cockpit loses consciousness while trying to hold the cockpit door shut and reach an oxygen mask. The hijackers seize the opportunity and break back into the cockpit. Meanwhile, Sophie brings Tom back to Farid before chasing after Etbal as the aircraft begins descending rapidly. A short while later, she finds him hiding inside a bulletproof vehicle in the cargo hold. Her bullets cannot penetrate it. Then, Etbal does something that even terrifies Sophie. He injects himself with the syringe filled with her blood. Sophie desperately begs him to stop, but it is already too late. Within seconds, Etbal begins transforming into a vampire. Realizing there is only one way to stop him, Sophie finds alcohol and matches, pours the alcohol over the vehicle, and sets it on fire. As the flames engulf the vehicle, Sophie remembers the old vampire's words that monsters like them should never let the curse spread. Determined to end it, she repeatedly smashes Etbal's face. But just before the final blow, Etbal tells her she will never control the monster inside her. Sometime later, the aircraft stabilizes. However, the hijackers notice the fire in the cargo hold. Before they can investigate, Sophie puts out the flames and climbs back inside. The moment they see her, they immediately open fire. The passengers panic and run toward the front. Among them is Farid, who grabs Tom and tries to get him to safety. Meanwhile, when the hijackers return to the vehicle, they make a shocking discovery. Etbal is still alive. Before anyone can react, he attacks Curtis and drinks his blood before chasing the others. On the other side, Sophie seals the cargo hold door. Just then, she hears Tom shouting that everyone is trying to kill him. Farid quickly reassures him, but another passenger suddenly fires at Sophie. The attack instantly triggers her vampire instincts. She lunges at the passenger before everyone rushes to stop her. Sophie easily throws them aside and starts moving toward Farid instead. Fortunately, Tom calms his mother down before she attacks him. However, another passenger immediately points a gun at Sophie. Just then, Sophie hears terrifying noises from the cargo hold. She instantly realizes what has happened. More vampires are waking up. Without wasting another second, Sophie runs downstairs and tries to trap Etbal behind a cargo door. Farid follows to help. Unfortunately, Etbal bites Farid during the struggle. At that exact moment, another man shoots Etbal before he can break through. Even though Etbal is stopped, Farid has already been infected. Sophie is forced to make an incredibly painful decision. Without hesitation, she cuts off Farid's bitten arm before the infection spreads. Meanwhile, Curtis, now fully transformed, also tries forcing his way back inside. Sophie somehow kills both Curtis and Etbal once again while saving a flight attendant from infection. Afterward, she returns to the passengers, where Farid explains that Sophie has been protecting them all along. Sophie then takes Bastian into the cockpit. Inside, Bastian reveals another serious problem. The aircraft is dangerously low on fuel, meaning they must land as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Farid and Tom convince Sophie to hide beneath the cockpit, where sunlight cannot reach her. Farid stays with Bastian while Sophie hides. A short time later, Bastian finally contacts a nearby RAF airbase. He reports that the plane was hijacked, but the hijackers have been locked inside the cargo hold. Meanwhile, Tom goes upstairs to search for Sophie's medicine. Just then, horrifying growls echo from the cargo hold. One badly wounded passenger willingly opens the door, frees Etbal, and offers himself to be bitten. Surprisingly, Etbal ignores him and immediately attacks the remaining passengers. Sophie and Farid witness complete chaos as terrified passengers desperately try to break into the cockpit. However, Bastian refuses to unlock the door. At that moment, Sophie realizes landing the aircraft could spread the vampire outbreak to innocent people outside. Farid comes up with another plan. He suggests landing the aircraft first, then destroying it with a bomb before the vampires escape. With that plan in mind, they head toward the fuel tank and find the detonator, only to realize the timer is missing. Understanding the situation, Sophie volunteers to sacrifice herself by staying behind to trigger the explosion after everyone escapes. But Tom refuses to accept that. In the very next moment, Tom grabs the UV light and runs toward the cargo hold to search for the bomb timer. The vampires immediately chase him, but after a desperate search, he finally finds it. However, before he can escape, the vampires attack again, knocking the UV light away. Inside the cockpit, Sophie sees everything through the monitors. Without thinking twice, she rushes out to save her son. Before leaving, she asks Bastian if the aircraft is still on course. He assures her it is flying safely on autopilot with air traffic control's guidance. Sophie then makes Farid promise to always take care of Tom. After that, she does something shocking. Knowing she is about to lose control completely, Sophie drinks Bastian's blood, accepting there is no turning back. Meanwhile, Tom has been completely surrounded by vampires. At that moment, Etball declares Tom will become his next victim. But before he can reach him, Sophie suddenly attacks. An intense battle breaks out between the two vampires. During the fight, Etball bites Sophie. Watching everything unfold, Tom comes up with a dangerous idea. He opens the cargo hold door, creating a massive pressure blast that throws Etball out of the aircraft. Meanwhile, Farid notices Tom is trapped downstairs. Just then, Etball somehow climbs back inside and heads straight toward Tom. Realizing there is no other choice, Farid switches off the autopilot and sharply tilts the aircraft. The maneuver works. Sunlight pours directly onto Etball, and within seconds, he burns to ashes. Meanwhile, Tom desperately lets Sophie drink his blood. A few moments later, she regains consciousness, but can barely control herself. Realizing she can no longer trust her instincts, Sophie pushes Tom away before crawling back into the cargo hold to protect him. The story then returns to the RAF airbase. Tom desperately begs the translator to save Farid, but she coldly replies that Farid is nothing more than a terrorist. Tom repeatedly warns everyone about the vampires, but no one believes him. Eventually, doctors sedate Tom while Colonel Drummond orders his soldiers to hold their positions. Meanwhile, inside the aircraft, the vampires begin feeding on the dead bodies. At the same time, the military repeatedly orders Farid to surrender. Farid desperately warns them about the danger inside, but nobody listens. Ignoring his warnings, the soldiers open fire on him before storming the aircraft and dragging him outside, believing the threat is over. What they don't realize is that something far more horrifying is still waiting inside. Meanwhile, Tom is being transported to a hospital. During the journey, he secretly injects the paramedic with the sedative, jumps out of the moving ambulance, and sprints back toward the plane. At the same time, the soldiers enter the aircraft only to be attacked by the vampires hiding inside. Farid keeps warning them, but it is already too late. A few moments later, Farid spots Tom running toward the aircraft and desperately shouts for him to stop, but Tom is too far away. As soon as Tom reaches the plane, he sees the heartbreaking sight of his mother drinking a soldier's blood. He calls out to her again and again. But Sophie is no longer the mother he once knew. At that moment, Tom finally realizes the painful truth. His mother is truly gone. Without hesitating for even a second, he detonates the bomb. A massive explosion engulfs the entire aircraft. Even Colonel Drummond and his soldiers stand frozen as they watch the plane disappear in flames. After everything is over, Farid uses the last of his strength to make his way through the wreckage. There he finds Tom standing all alone. The two silently embrace each other and break down in tears, bringing this heartbreaking story to an emotional end.